It's Parshiot Tazria-Metzora this week, and a lot has been written about the subject we're going to look at, the question of the different time periods before total purification or reinstatement at the temple for a childbearing mother, the differentiation between when a daughter is born and a son is born. And Rav Shah uses this both to, interestingly enough, references already an essay, his essay that we saw on Vayikra and his essay that we saw on Tzav. So you can already sense that has developing ideas and an approach to Sefer Vayikra that we can see him fit this in the framework of, and cites a few different positions. And there's a wonderful essay on the Torah.com, which Ira sent my way, and I didn't get a chance to look at, but maybe he or I will post the link in the chat. I think it's by Rabbi Dr. Zev Farber, and also explores a wide range of possibilities. Of course, I'm aware that our learning tonight is as Yom HaShoah begins. While there's no quite explicit direct connection with the learning, I think obviously the themes of life and death loom incredibly large when we think about the impossible thoughts of what our forebears endured. And I hope that in some tiny way, our learning is a strengthening of their legacy. And I hope that you have the opportunity over the remainder of the day to participate in some of the important programming that we have. It's a lovely RJCP program that just concluded. And tomorrow, with thanks to Rabbi Moshe Edelman, we will be sharing the link for a reading of Megillat HaShoah, the contemporary composition meant to be a sort of a commemoration of the day in light of the way we often commemorate holidays with the reading of a Megillah type book. It was composed by Professor Avigdor Shinan, whose late father-in-law Pesach Klein was and mother-in-law Tildy Klein were cherished by 8 members. He's a phenomenal scholar in Israel, and so there will be a link in tomorrow's. There was tonight, and a link in tomorrow's to listen in to that reading, which takes place all around the world. And then, of course, our Yom HaShoah Seder will be at 8 o'clock. We encourage those who are able to come in person tomorrow night to do so. And there's a Zoom link for those who can't make it in person. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Tazria number 1, living on the boundary, the complexity and anxiety of childbirth. The Parashah begins by discussing the ritual status of a mother after childbirth. When a woman gives birth to a boy, she is ritually impure for 7 days, and then enters a period of purification, kind of limbo, for 33 additional days. During the first week, it seems, she is prohibited from engaging in sexual relations with her husband. During the days that follow, she is permitted to engage in sexual relations, but she is not allowed to touch anything holy or enter the sanctuary. These quotes are quotes from the Torah itself, and back out so we can get to Parshat Shavua. When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days, Tama'a Shivat Yamim, like at the time of her condition of menstrual separation. The Brit Milah takes place on the 8th day. And then for these additional 33 days, she remains in this state they call of blood purification, B'demei Tahara. B'chol Kodesh lo tiga, she should not touch any consecrated thing. Vel hamikdash lo tavo, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. So not touch anything holy or enter the sanctuary are quotes from the psukim at the beginning of our parashah. When her period of purification is over, she brings 2 sacrifices, an olah, or burnt offering, and a chatat, which is usually, though as we shall see problematically, translated as sin offering. If the woman gives birth to a girl, the time periods are each doubled. She is considered ritually impure for 14 days and must go through a 66-day period of purification. We can see that here. Verse 5, V'im nekevate leid, if she bears a female, right at the beginning we said V'yalda zachal, she gives birth to a male. Now it's V'im nekevate leid. And the same ideas, the same rulings come with the doubling. Tamah shivuayim kenidata, 2 weeks of classical tuma, and then shishim yom v'sheshet yamim teshev al demei tahara, 66 days of this state of blood purification. And then at the end, as Rav Shai summarized for us, she brings keves ben shnato la'olah, uven yonah oto lechatat. We see here a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering and a pigeon or turtle dove for sin offering. Curious to see what this asterisk tells us. C note at 4.3, I'm sure, is a further discussion of the question of what the word chatat itself means. Interpreters have long been perplexed by this strange set of laws. Why is a woman who gives birth considered impure? And why must she bring a chatat or sin offering? Has she done something wrong for which she must atone? Even more confusingly, why does her impurity last longer when she gives birth to a girl than when she gives birth to a boy? Does this tell us anything about the relative status or importance of boys and girls? Okay, so we have really 3 questions. Why tuma to begin with? Why a chatat at the conclusion? And why the differentiation between boys and girls? As part of its passion for maintaining order, Leviticus is extremely concerned with divisions and boundaries. This footnote takes us back to our essay that we did on Vayikra about its notion of creating order and structure as sort of its fundamental mission or focus. The priests are enjoined to distinguish between the sacred and profane and between the impure and the pure. Right? That was one of the verses that he quoted also in paralleling it to the God's acts in the creation of the world. Although boundaries are to be strictly upheld, sometimes unavoidably they are crossed, resulting in a state of ritual impurity. It's crucial to emphasize that impurity is not in and of itself sinful. It is rather a simple fact of life, a part of nature. Tellingly, the Torah never prohibits anyone other than a priest from becoming impure. People and objects routinely and unavoidably contract impurity at all times. In this context, sin comes into the picture only when one is impure and does nothing to change that state and return to purity, right? At some point, one is enjoined to purify themselves, and if they don't, that's a problem. But the mere fact of becoming tameh isn't in and of itself a problem. It's a natural occurrence. One of the crucial boundaries in Leviticus, arguably the most crucial one, is the line between life and death. Corpses, for example, having just crossed the boundary between life and death, are considered impure and extremely contagious to those who touch them. In light of this, maternal impurity after childbirth comes into clear focus. The mother's impurity implies no moral judgment whatsoever. She is considered ritually impure, not morally impure. Childbirth takes place at, and to some degree unsettles, the boundaries between life and death. A new life comes into the world, but blood, considered the seed of life, is lost in the process. Since for the Torah, blood is the chief symbol of life, its oozing from the body is considered the sign of death. Bible scholar Baruch Levine, we saw him last week also, and thanks to everybody for our learning and fruitful discussion. Those who were in shul may know that I used a lot of the essay as the subject of my drasha this past Shabbat. Baruch Levine suggests that the Torah uses the category of impurity to deal with conditions that are life-threatening. In the ancient world, few situations conjured up fears of death quite like childbirth did. Although the new mother was a source of joy to the community, Levine explains, and her new child a blessing, she also generated anxiety. The childbearing mother was particularly vulnerable, and her child was in danger too, since infant mortality was widespread in pre-modern societies. Although this may, and we have lots of general data about this and lots of halachic indications of this, just the notion, that until really 30 days, fetus, a newborn rather, is sort of in an in-between status. The rabbinic notions of babies that were born at 7 months versus 8 months versus 9 months, all reflect their ways of grappling with a reality that involved lots of pregnancy loss and lots of infant mortality. Although this may seem counterintuitive, Levine insists that by declaring the mother impure, susceptible, the community sought to protect and shelter her. And so I think, just to note, I think Rav Shai is sort of giving us two related but not identical answers. One is that kind of impurity is reflective of the kind of categories of experiences of boundary crossing, and the birth of a child and the boundary crossing between life and death is that ultimate boundary crossing, and the birth of a child, is in and of itself a kind of that boundary crossing. It's both a creating of new life, or literally bringing into the world new life, and also the blood loss. I think that's sort of in and of itself. And then this notion of the fear of death also that is accompanied by childbirth: fear of death for the mother, fear of death for the child. Maternal loss of blood during childbirth is a concrete reminder and manifestation of the very real danger that in bringing forth new life, the mother faces possible death, as does her vulnerable newborn. As Bible scholar Frank Gorman puts it, the woman manifests the loss of life in the act of bringing forth a new life. It is the woman's location in this ambiguous state that generates her impurity. She holds together in her own body the realm of life and the realm of death. I think it's this awareness that I think produces the requirement for a childbearing mother, after a delivery, to say the bracha of Birkat HaGomel, the blessing of thanksgiving over having emerged from a risky situation. And usually the way we frame it is literally this: we recognize that every moment of giving life is itself a moment of risking life, and hence the appropriateness of the Birkat HaGomel. The moment of childbirth is thus highly paradoxical and not a little bit confusing. New life, but also a new threat to life. Maternal impurity, then, is a way of coping with and responding to the ways in which the boundaries of life and death have been crossed, and to the great dangers that crossing brings in its wake. And I think, I don't know that we've gotten to the bottom of what Tuma actually is here. I think we can understand why, the risk of death and the generating of new life and the loss of blood all are the kinds of things that can generate Tuma. But I'm not sure we have a real simple, crisp explanation, but we see the kinds of ways in which Tuma is manifested as a category that map onto this experience. The one that I think is least clear but interesting is this one of somehow the declaration of Tuma is a protection or a shelter. I'm not sure exactly how that actually plays out, but maybe just by, if it's a category that helps in some way highlight attention or draw people's awareness to the vulnerability. I don't know if that's how it really manifests in other situations, but there's plenty to think about there. Let's go one more paragraph to do the sin offering, and then we'll pause before we get to the gender differentiation. Why then must the new mother bring a sin offering? The simple answer is that she does not. The prevalent rendering of chatat as sin offering is mistaken. This is another, like last week, another sort of Rav Shai trying to help us clarify that we may have a common misconception about what a seemingly straightforward word means, that if we can get it more clear, can really help, change our perspective on a difficult question. The prevalent rendering of chatat as sin offering is mistaken. Bible scholar Jacob Milgram, who was, wrote the 3 massive volumes of the Anchor Bible on Vayikra and really his life's work, has convincingly shown that a chatat is not a sin offering at all. The Hebrew verb in question is not chata, sin, but chita, which carries no other meaning than to cleanse expurgate, decontaminate. Korban chatat then is an offering of purgation, or as Everett Fox suggests, a decontamination offering. Right, so it may be a response in some cases to sin, but it's a cleansing offering, and sometimes things could need cleansing which aren't sinful. Traditional Jewish commentaries were well aware that what is at stake here is not sin. As the medieval Tosafists note, according to the literal meaning, the pshat of the text, the mother's sacrifice is not brought on account of sin. It's already in the medieval period, you have Mefarshim saying it can't be that, even if a chatat is being brought, it can't be that there was an act of wrongdoing here. There are other approaches that do take it. For example, I think it's Rashi who says, it's a response to the shouting and harsh language towards the husband that the childbearing mother may have expressed. But there is another perspective that says no, there was no wrongdoing that took place here, and the reason for the chatat is something different. Moreover, as we have seen, there's no suggestion whatsoever that the woman's impure status results from a sin she has committed. After all, in the Torah, fertility is seen as a great blessing and a fulfillment of God's creational designs. So first 2 points. Why tumah? Not because any wrongdoing was done, but because if we understand tumah more deeply, we understand that it's a marker of boundary crossings, the ultimate boundary being the one between life and death, and childbirth is a paradoxical and sort of bi-directional experience of that boundary crossing. And then 2, okay, but why the chatat? If there was no sin, answer because the chatat is not actually a sin offering, but a cleansing offering. Okay, any questions, comments, reactions, thoughts thus far? Lance, start us off.
Okay, let me just say that I was very impressed by this essay, by the way, and the way it is almost, it's Orthodox feminism, I think. But there's a point that I'd like to make, and looking at the Torah and looking at the Talmud, or looking at the Torah and looking at the contemporary commentary that we're reading, the difference is between the primacy of perception and the primacy of interpretation. And what's going on in ancient Hebrew Judaism is perception. In other words, the primacy of perception. And what's going on in the Talmud all the time, and what's going on right here, are interpretations that can be taken in a million ways. And the difference is that the Kohen is the one who sees the difference between sacred and profane. There was that one line which jumped out at me. And ironically, in contemporary philosophy, there is a school called phenomenology, in which there's actually a text by Maurice Merleau-Ponty, the French Catholic philosopher, called The Primacy of Perception. And so that there is, in effect, a movement in philosophy to go back to the Torah and away from Plato and all the other post-Hebrew commentators from the Greek and so forth. The other point I'd like to make, totally different, radically different, is that at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, there is research going on to develop a system that eliminates pregnancy and childbirth. It's all done artificially. And it's, for me, kind of fascinating that we've got a world in which childbirth is a danger, is a dangerous path, necessary, critically necessary. And now there's a possibility in the future to eliminate that completely. So there's this difference between the ancient world, 2 differences really, between the ancient world and our world. And I just wanted to bring those points out.
Thank you. Thank you. Always a lot to digest and a lot of fascinating thoughts. So thank you, Lance. Any other comments or questions on what we saw so far? Okay, onwards to part 2. But even if we can make good sense of the new mother's state of impurity, we are still left to wonder, why does that condition last longer when the child is a girl? The biblical text is silent on this question, so we have no choice but to speculate. Some scholars assume that some form of sexism must be at play, that the law must somehow be an expression of the sense that boys are superior to and more highly valued than girls. One recent scholar, for example, claims, without offering any evidence, that the different time periods of impurity after childbirth seem to reflect primarily the male chauvinism of the culture, a social preference for males. But it isn't at all clear that length of impurity should somehow correlate with worth or status. As Bible scholar Elaine Goodfriend notes, greater potential for impurity does not indicate social status. After all, the handling of a human corpse defiles to a far greater degree than touching a dead lizard. Yet the status of the human is higher than that of a reptile, right? So we can't say that, the longer you generate impurity, the lower you are on the social status, because dead humans generate much more impurity than dead lizards. So that approach doesn't seem to hold up. So why does the mother's impurity last longer when a girl is born? Bible scholar Samuel Ballantyne, among others, argues that a woman's loss of blood at childbirth leaves her in a weakened condition that makes her susceptible to illness and potentially to death. That same threat applies to her daughter, who as a mother-to-be will one day share the experience of losing some of her life in order to bring life into the world. In giving birth to a daughter, in other words, a woman brings into the world another person who may well skate uneasily on the often very thin line between life and death. This amplifies anxiety about the boundaries between life and death, and thus lengthens the mother's period of impurity. I'm just seeing what Adela wrote in on the chat. Interestingly, other cultures have a 30 or 40-day period of rest and or isolation for the mother post-birth, sometimes referred to as the fourth trimester. Right, it's interesting. That sort of, that broadly, I think, relates to the kind of comment, which we saw, was it Baruch Levine? Lost it, about right, seeking to protect and shelter, that somehow that period, especially because it was called Demei Tahara and not Tuma, the sort of period of limbo, whatever it was, might have somehow been an opportunity to just protect and shelter, and provide space to recover, recuperate, something like that. I think that's a great point. Okay, deep disquiet about the risk of childbirth to the mother's life is pervasive in Jewish sources. One seemingly odd law holds that the mitzvah of procreation, pru'ervu, is incumbent upon men, but not women. Since procreation is impossible without women's active participation, this is puzzling, to say the least. One does not need an advanced degree in biology to understand this. Explaining this rabbinic ruling, Rav Meir Simcha of Devinsk, that's the Meshech Chachma, suggests that the reason women are exempt from the mandate to procreate is that the Torah does not want to demand of them that they place their own lives in danger by bearing children. In other words, yes, it's necessary that they do it, but to create it as a chiyuv, to formally obligate them, something feels incongruous about that, that there would be a formal mitzvah placed, which would necessitate some sense of, or some degree of self-endangerment. Right, it sort of cuts against the idea of v'chai b'hem, that's what sort of the Torah and its mandates are about. Even though, of course, pru'ervu is about creating life, but it also entails this risking life. So again, it's not that their participation and valuing is not essential, but at a philosophical and also technical level, to actually formally obligate cuts against a different dimension of the system. It's possible to dismiss this as apologetics, but I am not so sure. More likely, it reflects a deep-seated sense of respect for the reality that women can, all too often did, and to some extent still do, die in bringing forth life. Many of us who live in places with access to advanced medical care find it hard to relate to these laws and to the anxieties that animate them. Many of us have never known a woman who died in childbirth. something that would likely have been true of very few people just 100 years ago. That is obviously an unambiguously good thing. And yet the blessing or luck of living when we do, where we do, means that the laws of maternal impurity in Parashat Tazria can strike many of us as alien or antiquated or both. How should we relate to these verses in our changed situation? I think just pausing to appreciate, I think, like what we've already seen in all the essays Rav Shai do, which is to sort of acknowledge how the text might land in the ears of a modern reader, take that seriously, and then attempt to do some, good digging and presenting different commentaries and perspectives for a fresh reading of the Pshat, which helps us understand how it made sense in its, in its cultural context of the time. And then we're going to get to, okay, and what does it mean for us today? So just again, appreciating the consistency of his method, even in these different settings. It's worth noting that in recent years, rates of maternal mortality have been on the rise in the United States. They have more than doubled over the past 25 years. A recent report indicates that each year in the US, about 700 women die of pregnancy-related complications, and 52,000 experience emergencies such as acute renal failure, shock, respiratory distress, aneurysms, and heart surgery. And I just reflect for a moment on the fact that sometimes, like, someone will tell me, about the news of the birth of their child and how's everybody doing. Just the very fact that we always say mother and baby are doing well reflects the fact that we don't take that either case for granted. Someone will say, actually it was a very challenging, dangerous, risky delivery. It often takes me a moment to remind myself that continues to be a real reality, that even having modern medical care we have a lot more we can do to treat, but doesn't rule out and can't protect against. Moreover, and not surprisingly, given massive inequalities in access to advanced medical care, rates of maternal mortality vary dramatically around the world. While in Israel, 7 out of 100,000 women die in childbirth, and in Hungary, 21 do. In the Republic of Congo, 560 out of 100,000 women die, while in South Sudan, 2,054 do. Right, it's almost 300 times as regular in South Sudan as in Israel. The specter of women dying in childbirth may be held at bay for many of us, but it still remains all too real. And in many places, childbirth kills with devastating frequency. Maternal ritual impurity is the Torah's way of recognizing the mystery and power of childbirth. Now he's going to, I think, sort of come back and touch on his 3 questions. A new being has just crossed the boundary into life, but it is also a way of acknowledging the terror that in helping her child across the boundary, the mother faces the risk that she could cross it in the other direction. The risks have been mitigated for many modern women, but they have surely not been eliminated. Leviticus wants us to remain aware of that very stark and sobering fact. Jewish theology insists that those of us who have received certain gifts are intended to pass them on, that we are intended to be channels for blessing and goodness rather than receptacles. This is a reference to what we saw last time with Tzav and the idea of the Korban Shlamim and the Todah in particular, and the no leftovers being designed to enable us to, recognize that we're supposed to share goodness, and when we receive goodness, pay it forward. Taking stock of our changed situation thus places obligations on us. This is the move to today, recognizing the difference between what the Torah's context was and what ours is. We are required to help ensure that others receive what we have already been given, the possibility of safe and effective medical care for women during pregnancy and childbirth. We are called, in other words, to help make death in childbirth as distant a memory as is humanly possible. And so, and this, of course, is this piece is an interpretation which kind of only makes sense today, right? In an ancient time where it was commonplace, the tum'ah and the, arguably this longer period for girls than for boys, and the chatat, those things all make sense. now those things don't make as much sense to us, so we understand them in their historical context, and then we say, recognizing the gap between that reality and our reality, we have to work to continue to make that gap real and look around the world where that's, still a challenge, and do what we can to ameliorate that. So again, on the three questions, just summarizing, the Tumah is a reflection of the anxiety that we have and the recognition of this paradoxical, boundary crossing between life and death that happens at childbirth. The Chatat is not a reflection of sin, but a kind of a cleansing that responds to that anxiety, risk, and presence of kind of death hovering through blood loss. And the suggestion is that the doubling of the period for the birth of a girl reflects the fact that bringing a girl into the world is bringing the next round of that risk into the world. And so that's sort of embedded in the, in the purification or, restoration process that the childbearing mother undergoes. Thoughts, questions, comments before we wrap up? Anybody before we get back to Lance for the last word? No need. Okay, great. And Lance, while you're sharing a thought, I'm going to see if I can quickly get the link to the other article and that Ira sent and put it in the chat. Go ahead, Lance, you're up.
Okay, number one, we probably wouldn't have Judaism without midwives. There's no mention of midwives here. And the midwives are the heroines in the Moses story. And my guess is that they were the heroines in ancient times. Number two, I want to quote Mark Twain. There are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And if you look at the statistics here, what you don't see, and I have no idea whether anyone sees it, is what is called bad medicine. So how many of these situations where women die in childbirth are really the result of incompetent physicians? All I'm trying to suggest is that, we say lots of things, and if you think about them laterally, you can begin to see other possibilities here.
Great. Thank you. I just popped into the chat this long essay on the Torah.com with a whole range of different possible explanations. So feel free to take a look there. If you have trouble copying and pasting from the chat, you just go to the Torah.com and look at the list of this week's Parsha essays. You'll find it pretty near the top. Just a reminder, next Monday night is Erev or Leil Yom HaZikaron, the beginning of Yom HaZikaron. And so we have both the community-wide commemoration at the Riverdale Y taking place around 7:30. And then we have an evening of songs and stories at the Beit, which is being run by our local Israeli community, Beit community, which should be very, very powerful and meaningful. I'm very grateful to them for doing it at the Beit. It's often just meets in somebody's living room, but they wanted to open it up to the community more. Upshot of that is that we won't be learning on Monday night, but our goal is to learn on Wednesday night after Yom HaAtzmaut festivities wind down. So for those who are able to make it Wednesday night at 8:30 instead of Monday night, that's when we will have next week's learning opportunity. So thanks to everybody. Thanks for tolerating the delay, and hope you find more good learning on this topic over the remainder of the week. Love to mom and dad. Good night to all. Take care. Bye-bye.